Hey everyone, my name is Michael Clark. I'm host of the CCA's Leadership Development Podcast, and welcome to another episode. My guest on today's podcast is Ugo Okpewho. Oh man, we just went through this and I've already butchered it.
We did.
Hold on, but I'm gonna try again. Ugo Okpewho.
Very good. Good
Yeah,
job.
you say that, but you know I
No,
butchered it.
no. Seriously, it was good. That was a 50%.
Well, that's gone down from us practicing before we hit record. So, Puello, I got it. Okay. Ugo is my guest today, and Ugo, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Michael. This is great. Thanks for this.
No, this is awesome. You've got a great story to tell. I'm excited for people to hear it. But let me give everybody a brief intro to Ugo, just so you know who he is, where he's coming from, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along here as well. So Ugo is a managing director of healthcare risk management and advisory with FTI Consulting. Prior to FTI, Ugo had stints at insurance payer companies such as Care First, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, Express Scripts, as well as doing some consulting and audit firm work with firms like PwC, BDO, Aon. So I had a varied background that I do want to get into, and because I think with your experience and exposures to these different types of actuarial work, you've got a lot of things to offer up to our audience. So I'm excited about that. But a couple of other interesting things about Ugo. He's a former board member of the International Association of Black Actuaries. He's a current member of the Academy's Health Equity Task Force. His father was a professor and author who got a teaching job at an upstate New York university. And that's what brought you to the US initially. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
From where? Where did you come from?
West Africa, Nigeria. So yeah,
Okay.
we
All
all
right.
we all relocated because he, got the job. It was
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Um, you originally weren't intending on being an actuary. You were headed towards Wall Street. In fact, didn't even know what an actuary was until post college when you met one. Okay, how did you meet an actuary? Like, in what realm do you randomly show up and you're like, find
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
that's an actuary?
Yeah. So I took a job at an insurance company. So it happened to be Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield has a Medicaid subsidiary. It was called Horizon Mercy at the time. This is late 90s, early 2000s. And they had a job opening for a healthcare analyst, right? So I didn't, it was a numerical type of job. It was analysis. I didn't really care what it was. It could have been pharmaceutical, but it was healthcare, right? So I go there and I'm learning about healthcare and it's interesting, but I met this guy, who I'm still friends with today, one of my great mentors. His name is Ben Brandon. Great guy. I mean, he was the only actuary there, and he was just, I mean, this guy was revered. Everybody, anytime any decision needs to be made, oh, let's talk to Ben. Where's Ben? Every start of the month, Ben would shut his door. They would say, "Hey, don't disturb Ben. He's doing the reserves," and he was giving so much respect in the company. And I was like, man, what does this guy do? So I became friendly with him. I started, sort of understanding what he did, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. Well, win for
Yeah.
us, and good for Ben for being a good example that way, enough to pique your curiosity.
Yeah.
So you're married, two daughters. So
Yep.
you're living the girl dad life.
Living the girl dad life. I love
Mhm.
every second of it, man. It's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
A different world than the one that I'm used to. I live the boy dad life. I've got three sons myself, so it's always interesting to compare notes with people that have a very
Yeah.
different family perspective with their children there. Now you had
You
an
know,
eight year.
it's funny. So so I have two sisters and a brother, right? Me and my brother, we have all girls. My brother has three girls. I have two girls. My Each of my sisters has two boys each. So it's like the boys had girls and the girls had boys. And but it's interesting hanging around her and her boys. I'm like, wow, I don't know how you guys do it because girls are very, very different from boys.
We have that conversation at our house quite a bit, actually. All right, now you had an 8 year gap between your ASA and FSA, what was
Uh,
intended to be a 6 month break after your ASA turned into 5 years of living life,
yes.
marriage, kids, but polished off your FSA. A couple of other things for people to note about you. you're an avid sports fan, you soccer player turned single-digit handicap golfer. I noticed your clubs there over
Oh
your
yeah.
back shoulder there.
Yep. Always have them there.
Proof of that. So
Yeah.
that's great. Well, again, happy to and very excited to have you on the program today.
Thanks. Thanks, Mike. Yeah.
So Ugo, let's start with your career journey. We mentioned this in your intro with the bio that you've
Sure.
worked in insurance, you've been on the consulting side, you've been on the audit
Right.
side. Health is a really interesting practice area in that it spans a lot of different areas pretty seamlessly, more seamlessly
Right.
than other practice areas, I think. So
Yeah.
what's the difference from your perspective in working for an insurance company versus a consulting firm versus an audit firm? Like, what have you gained from those experiences?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And quite honestly, that's probably the number one question I usually get when I'm, like say mentoring, somebody young, as we'll talk at some of my work with the IABA and my volunteering. But I mentor a lot of kids that's not related to IABA, only related to IABA as well. I love to mentor, right? But most of them who are thinking about going into the actuarial field, probably the number one question is, do I do consulting or do I do work in an insurance company? So I mean, I have 20 plus years experience, right? And it's probably like evenly split now between, the number of years I spent at insurance companies or payers versus consulting. And there are a lot of differences, but there are also a lot of similarities. I would say the biggest difference, right? At an insurance company or most of the functions that you're doing are for that company, right? Your number one, especially as an actuary, your number one goal is to sort of calculate, monitor, calculate risk, look at the reserves, come up with ways that company can be as profitable as they can be, right? Obviously you look at competition and things like that, but most of the experiences you're having are internal. You're dealing with almost the same people every month. You do the reserve. You calculating claims. So it's very, I wouldn't say very repetitious actions, but everything is sort of you can sort of predict sort of what your day is going to look like, and the people you interact with are pretty constant. There's turnover here and there, and with working from home, obviously people are remote now, which is different. But I would say, and I'll say another thing about working for insurance companies. The actuaries that work for insurance companies are typically very, very strong because they sort of look at things, especially the more senior ones. They've had experiences within the firm, so they know what happens with when the reserves are set and how that impacts the financials. And then when it comes time for pricing, they're dealing with accounting and looking at current results, but they're dealing with marketing people and trying to look at what's in the competition and how rates can affect that. And when I worked for Horizon, I would even get involved in operational sort of initiatives when say members didn't get their mail or something, or someone was complaining about the rate increase. So they sort of have a more holistic view of what healthcare is, and they're very, very strong. Um, on the flip side, I mean, they're not as, I would say, polished, I would say, as maybe like consulting actuaries. Consulting actuaries, get a lot of variety of work, right? So it could be the same, function you're providing for two different, organizations, but you get more of a holistic view of, okay, this is how different, companies act, and there's a lot of variety of work and very, very interesting work. I mean, people call you and just sometimes want to, figure out, hey, I have, I know I want to do something, but I have absolutely no clue how to actually get to it. So that could be very, very interesting. So I would say there's a lot of differences, but also, some similarities exist.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, right? And I think what you've said validates some. When I was on the board with the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, we would talk a lot about what it means to be a consulting actuary, and we put that in quotes just because, yes, you have the distinctions of working for a consulting firm versus working at an insurance company. But I think what you've said about working at an insurance company fits well with kind of the broader definition of a consultant. You've got different stakeholders. They just happen to all work for the same
That's right.
company. And you do have to still learn how to speak their different languages,
That's right.
whether it's marketing or operations or anything like that. And that's very similar to the consulting world, but in the consulting
Right.
world, you just have a lot of external
That's
clients.
exactly right.
So you do get to, consulting maybe is a bad name. Being a consulting actuary compared to an insurance actuary doesn't mean that you're doing completely different things. There's some similar skill sets,
Yes.
especially in the healthcare space, that you have to develop to be, if you want to be successful, and especially if you want to be in a leadership role.
That's exactly right. I'm doing the same exact things I was doing when I worked in insurance companies, looking at reserves, our rate calculations and things like that. It's just, as you said, the stakeholders being external versus internal, and understanding how, companies, what different companies care about, and being able to communicate that, effectively to different constituents. Absolutely right.
All right. So what have you learned from the various roles you've had over the years? You've worked in a bunch of different roles. We mentioned the audit side of things, in addition to consulting and insurance. Um, what have been some of the, when you look at the different roles that you've had, what have been the big takeaways? What have you gotten out of those experiences?
Right. So I mean that's that's a pretty loaded question, right? Because we could talk about that forever, right? But
Oh yeah.
I think that our actuarial training is pretty tremendous. And as I get older, I have more perspective on it and all that. But I mean, you're taking these exams and it's, and your life revolves around May, November, right? And you're passing, you're failing, and you're going through all these things. But I mean, when you finally get through it and you come through all all the things you've learned about, character and hard work and, like resilience, um, we are pretty valuable in almost any setting, right? I mean, I've had roles that are like non-traditional, like for actuaries, and I've had purely actuarial roles, and even within companies that I've worked in, I've been pulled into meetings or strategic discussions that just have to do with, hey, Ugo, how do you see this, right? So I mean, it doesn't have to be an actuarial problem or an actuarial issue, but the way we are taught to think through problems and and sort of factor everything in and sort of look at contingencies and I think it's you know it's pretty important. It's very strong. I mean, it makes us a huge asset to really any organization. So I mean, that's sort of the common thread that I've seen. It's like, I mean, actuaries are very well respected by people who know what actuaries are and value actuaries and know what actuaries do. But I mean, even if someone doesn't know what an actuary is, right? You can be in a room with them and have conversations and be able to sort of demonstrate that that the way you approach kind of solving problems is very unique. Um,
Yeah, I like that, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, as a pension actuary myself, right, thinking about, well, what would happen if all of a sudden the pension actuarial world dried up and there wasn't any need for a pension actuary anymore? What would I do?
yeah,
And I come back to the same thing that you mentioned, like the skill set that I've developed by being an actuary can work in so many other places,
right,
right?
right.
And so I love that you said that, and it's great that you've been able to see that firsthand in the different roles and companies that you've worked for.
Right. And how else? I mean, just imagine how, like, all the things that we've been through to get to the FSA or ASA level, right? I mean, it doesn't turn off. Like, you can't just shut it off, right? It's like, I mean, that's just like who you are, all right? And, imagine studying. Remember the exams? Imagine studying for an exam. You study hard and you get a 3 or 4. It's like, but you know that material pretty well. In any other setting, in college or whatever, that would have been, like a high A. But it's like, okay, you have to go back to the drawing board, like it teaches like resilience, even like humility. Imagine you know this stuff so well that you have to sit down and say, okay, all right, where did I go wrong? Like I mean, that teaches a lot of character. So yeah, I just think that it's very strong.
So you're a proponent of people failing exams, huh?
I mean, yes, I am. I mean, actually, I am. I mean, I rarely know people who, didn't fail any of the exams. I know
Hmm.
one guy. He was just this guy was an alien. He didn't fail. He didn't get his FSA, right? He got all the way to ASA, and then when he got to the FSA exams, it was difficult for him, and I think he failed one, and then he stopped. So he's an ASA now, but those, I mean, ASA exams, all those math exams, he breezed through them with super high, like nines and tens, and um, but I think that failing does teach you a lot because really brings something out of you because you already know the material, you know it very, very well, but to actually dig deeper and be like, where did I mess up? Like where can I actually improve? And then finally getting over the hump. I mean, that's like the best teacher you can have.
Yeah, and I kid, right? I actually 100% agree with you there. There's definitely lessons to be learned from those experiences, and I think you've articulated that really well. That resilience and
Yeah.
that having to go back and dig in and dig deeper
Yeah.
is huge. Now, again, anybody that looks at your LinkedIn profile is going to see, and people will probably gather this. You've worked in a lot of different places. You've moved
Mhm.
around a bit over your
Mhm.
career. What has that experience been like for you? Do you have any regrets about the number of moves you've made over the years, or how you've structured your career?
It's funny you ask because I was talking to someone about this probably 6 months ago or so, and I mean, all my moves have been, I haven't been like well thought out or well strategized, right? I'm a very curious person. I've always sort of felt like I needed to gain more, and when I was younger. The way I thought about it when I was younger versus now is completely different. Now I have a family and I don't, I can't move as much, but it was nothing for me in my 20s and early 30s to, see a job that interested me that was in a completely different state. I wouldn't hesitate about that. I had no apprehension on things like that. But but also now I look back, 20 something years ago or so, and I'm like, this has made me who I am now. I mean, I've, I've had the payer experience. I've had provider experience. I've done the consulting. I've done the employer work. I didn't know it at the time, right? I'm just kind of looking for roles and looking to move or do different things that where I currently was, didn't give me the opportunity to do. Um, and I was just making those moves because that's what I felt like I needed to do at the time, to get a varied experience. But now I kind of look back and I'm more valuable to organizations, I would say now, because I can speak different languages and I've had varied experiences. So no, I wouldn't say I have any regrets, and I mostly did it out of curiosity, just because I wanted to learn new things, and the pace that I was learning at the time just wasn't fast enough for me at the time. So
No, I love that. I love that explanation because somebody might look at that on paper and say, "Well, what's going on with this guy?
yeah,
Why isn't he staying around at these places very long?" But when you
sure,
when you dig in and realize that it comes from that desire, that curiosity to learn more, you can understand how, yeah, you'd move from one thing to the next as you're just taking in more and more information and seeing the
yeah,
world from a different viewpoint. So I think that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of your volunteer work. We mentioned
Mm,
that you're a former board member with the International Association of Black Actuaries.
hmm.
I think our audience would appreciate hearing about your experience volunteering for IABA. So I'd love for you to
Yeah,
talk to us a bit about IABA, why you provided your time to that organization, and what you got out of it.
sure. No, and that's a good question. So I love volunteering. I love just giving my time. First of all, I think volunteering is one of the highest forms of like humanity. I think in my view, right? I mean, especially as you get older and your time is more and more squeezed, right? But imagine, I mean, giving time to something that you're not paid for, you don't naturally see, you don't immediately see any results, right? And you're giving your time, right? Um, IABA has International Associated of Black Actuaries has always intrigued me. I've always sort of been connected to them at different points. When I started taking the exams, I was younger. I would attend meetings. but I was so focused on, trying to get my credentials because I had a career before and I felt like I kind of started taking exams late. So I was just so zoned in on getting credentialed. But I've always felt like, it was my obligation to sort of help grow, grow the field of Black actuaries. I remember in the early 2000s, all the companies that I worked for, they were, I was either the only the Black actuary there, or one of very, very few. At the Blue Cross Care First, I was the only Black actuary, and then I went to PwC. That's a much bigger company, and I saw more Black kids hired, but actuaries, I was the only one, right? So it's like, all right, I have a duty here, and I just love how I've seen like the numbers of Black actuaries grow, right? I was looking at the stat a couple of months ago. The number of Black actuaries in the United States in 1992 was only 25, and then I think in 2017 it was like 210. Now in 2020, I think the stat I looked at was 2021. It's they're about 420 or something like that. So I mean, out of the slightly over 20,000 actuary credentialed actuaries in the United States, I mean that's only 2%. But I mean, it's a number that's kind of growing incrementally. It's really hard to grow this number a lot, right? I mean, you could put it in your goals all you want, that, oh, I'd like to see the number go from 2 to 3% in a 5-10 year span, but that's a very, very hard thing to do. I mean, it starts with educate information, education. It starts with awareness at a very young age, and a solid pipeline. So I just love to see how much the numbers have grown. And I go to the annual meetings now, and I see these young kids coming out of college. I see so many of them, and they're so smart and so driven, and so it's great, man. I love it.
That's awesome.
Uh,
Um, so from an IABA standpoint, like what, for those that maybe don't know much about the organization, what is IABA focused on? Yeah, it's this Association of Black Actuaries. It includes people like yourself who are credentialed, experienced, but then also trying to help those students coming through the school systems actually learn about the profession and decide to become an actuary and everything in between. So what is IABA focused on as an organization?
Yeah, so I mean that's you I mean you pretty much said it. The focus is, a I mean the ultimate focus is to grow the number of Black actuaries, and increase Black representation in the actuarial field. But to increase the, and we know this now. We've done studies, it's been years of experience. We noticed that it's not about, telling a kid who's strong at math in the 12th grade, or in the freshman year of college, about the field. It's about growing. It's about starting at a young age. I mean, getting the awareness at a young enough age, so that there's a pipeline. And once Black actuaries do make it into organizations, that they are evaluated fairly, and you see the progression of talented Black actuaries become, a rise to positions of management within organizations. Because that's another thing. You can hire a million Black actuaries if you want, but if you are not valuing them, I mean, if it's not a place that's conducive for them, where they see this
Mhm.
is somewhere I like, and this is somewhere I can see, myself, growing in my career, they will not stay. So consequently, you will not, see Black actuaries up in positions of leadership and management. So I mean, it's a multi-pronged thing.
Yeah, no, which I like, and especially about, you think about those entry level actuarial students that are coming in, that are becoming involved with IABA. They're seeing people like yourself that have gone through this. So it's not, it's they can see that there is a path forward to
Yes,
being a long-term successful actuary,
yes, yes,
which is
absolutely.
great. Now,
Yeah.
we also mentioned you're currently on the Academy's Health Equity Task
Mm.
Force. And for those that aren't familiar with that, I'm just going to read this. It's right off the Academy's website. The Health Equity Committee furthers the actuarial profession's commitment to health equity throughout the healthcare system. The committee examines actuarial practices and methods to assess the extent to which they may affect health disparities and recommends changes when appropriate, identifies areas in which actuarial methods can contribute to improving health issues, and applies an equity lens to the Academy's health policy work. Talk to us a bit about what this committee has been working on and what we can expect to see from this group, which does include a number of healthcare actuaries, including CCA's current president, Elaine Lin, and CCA board member Jim Dolstad. Like, what are you guys working on? Like, I read that description, but if you had to dumb it down for someone like me, like, what does this actually mean? What are you focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, full transparency and disclosure. I have not been as I would say active as I've been sort of in the past. Like, the last 6 to 12 months have been sort of I'm trying to build a business and grow my practice. But I was very active at one point. I am still in the committee, right? But it's I haven't been as active as I mean, that's the thing about volunteering, right? When you have a lot of time, you offer a lot of time, but when your time is squeezed, then things like that fall off. But no, I mean, I think you I mean, hit all the sort of high notes, right? I mean, it was very long worded, but I think you hit all the high notes. The focus on so as you know, right? The our health equity task force was kind of started around 2020, 2021, right? Remember the George Floyd incident. George Floyd was, I think, March, May 2020, and COVID was so it was a combination of two perfect forces, right? I don't say perfect, right? But COVID mixed with the George Floyd really sort of like exacerbated well, it didn't exacerbate it did, but it brought the awareness of, hey, listen, we have a problem in the United States. It's been said prior to COVID, but COVID was sort of like the major force. And our health equity task force was formed, and it's we've sort of been evaluating our so it's like in asking the question, what are we doing that's worsening or exacerbating sort of the health equity issue? I mean, we know there's a huge health equity issue present, but are we in any way, in any of our actuarial principles or the work we do with pricing or reserving or provider contracting, are there things that we're doing that is actually worsening the health equity issue? So it's like, so we spent a lot of work sort of trying to deconstruct all our practices and try to identify if we were actually maybe the cause of the problem. And I mean, we found some fascinating things. And I think the next step is so after we've done that, deconstructed, we understand what we're dealing with. The next step is, okay, educate other actuaries and and get other people on board, because we're the one kind of in the weeds looking at this stuff. Not everybody is understands it, or not everyone actually believes it's a problem. So educate other actuaries, and then try to affect maybe like future like legislation and policy, and be like a very strong voice advocating for policies at least being looked at from a health equity lens before anything happens. So
when we're talking about health equity, and again, let's maybe go back to basics here. When we say health equity, what are we talking about? Where's the disparity? Where is there inequality? Is it just in the healthcare system itself? Isn't it how we construct different healthcare plans? Like, where is that inequity? Where does it come through that we may not see on the surface?
yeah, sure. I'll give you some examples. So I mean, health equity, you can also sort of rope in racism in healthcare, right? Like you can read up on studies. There's a clear difference between how Black versus non-Black people are treated in the simple like delivery of healthcare. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking health equity policies around, say for example, we're looking at pricing an insurance policy, right? And we look at a region. In that region, that I'm giving an example, that region has a population that's pretty affluent, and a population that isn't. Population struggling. I mean, people who have problems, are getting food, people who have problems with transportation, things like that, right? Typically, an actuary just looks at claims, aggregates all the healthcare claims, applies trends it forward, all that. So you're taking an average of the claim activity, and then that price, that policy that you set is based on an average of the area, but one area is doing much more poorly than the other. So it's understanding that that there's subpopulations and people around that when you look at things in average, you're taking an average and you're combining, and you're not really focusing on the differences between populations. So
So is it a matter of just being able to drill down further than maybe what we've done and look at, try to isolate the different trends that are happening with different demographic groups that might, like you said, might be in the same zip code even, but have very different
needs
day-to-day
and
lives and needs and yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So it's like,
Like
okay,
that.
yeah, this policy, for this region, there has to, maybe we should start looking at implementing like a food benefit or a transportation benefit, because people who may be the sickest, maybe even have like the lowest claim expenses. So you think, oh, this region is everyone's healthy. It's like, no, these people are not going to the doctor because they can't get there, maybe because they're working 2 or 3 shifts, and don't have enough people to babysit the kids, or the bus schedule isn't conducive to the hours of operation of the doctor's office. So it's having that's what it means, a health equity lens, right? Having a lens where you're actually starting to consider these things. Yeah.
No, I like that, and would encourage everyone to go out to the Academy's website and see the work of that committee and stay up to date with what they're doing as well. Like I mentioned, lots of different healthcare actuaries involved in that, including those on the consulting side. So I think that's good work that's being done within the profession.
Yeah.
Ugo, let's switch gears. One last kind of round of questions for you here. This is one of my favorite things to talk to my guests about, and that's their viewpoints on leadership. When you think about the people that you consider to be successful leaders, love to hear what you think. What do they look like? What are their traits? How do they demonstrate that leadership in their day-to-day work?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a personal thing, right? Everyone you ask will give you a different sort of answer, right?
Absolutely.
So like the things I value, right, in leadership, I um definitely some, the people that I sort of look up to and find I respect the most are those who are, tough, but kind of understanding, right? I mean, really demand, perfection. I mean, demand that you're at least, trying your best, every single time, right? And don't kind of sugarcoat things, just to appease you, or make or smooth things, kind of give you the real talk, right? But also like have a lot of empathy, and are personable. Like I'm an outgoing, kind of personable guy. I always sort of I've gravitated to, towards I think it's hard, right? I think it's very hard to mix, being outgoing, being friendly, approachable, but also have a lot of empathy, and be tough, right? And kind of demand that work hard and get things done right. There's been very, very few people that I've met that I actually looked at and said, oh wow, I admire this person as a leader. I think I think too many leaders sort of get it wrong. And it's tough to be a good leader, a good, well-respected leader. It is.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, and I think you're right. It is a tough combination of characteristics, but being able to be empathetic and approachable, but at the same time not shying away from the real hard messages that they might have to
Yes.
get, and being able to demand from the people that they're working with. That's
Right.
it is a tough, that is not a skill set that that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
For
Agreed.
sure. But I agree with you. And I can think of people that have that skill set, and they're fun to work with because
Yeah.
you know where you stand, you know where you're
That's
at.
right.
You know they're not gonna dance around things. They're gonna tell you things like they are,
That's right.
but they're still gonna approach it from a human view, which
That's
is,
right.
hey, look, I'm not expecting you to be perfect. Here's the thing we need to work on. We're gonna work on it. We're not gonna pretend that
Yeah.
it's not there
That's
or just
right.
say, well, that's a weakness and we're just gonna deal with it.
Right, right. And I mean it's like, okay, yeah. I mean, all these conversations, all these tough conversations are about work. This is work, right? This is not, this is not how I feel about you as a person,
Hmm.
how I'm going to approach you. I mean, I can still go out and get a drink with you, but let's get what we need to get done and be as good in what we're doing as we possibly can be. I think that's to your point, I think that's difficult.
Well, so who are some of your role models then when it comes to leadership?
I always looked at Obama, Barack Obama, as I always like, wow, I would love to be with this man. I would love to work for him. Love to be around him because he was brilliant, very, very confident. He spoke well, super personable. I mean, everybody loved him. I mean, he was in the room. He could like mingle with anyone, talk. Babies loved him. I don't know if you've seen the videos where like an adult is holding a baby, they're crying, and they hand it over to Obama, and the baby keeps quiet or is smiling. Um, and I just think that he was very, very intellectual. And the way he approached everything was in a really well thought out way, and he sort of expected everyone around him to work hard and sort of take that view. But he was a personable guy, very approachable, and he certainly had a lot of empathy, right? So I've always looked up to Obama. Obama to me, I mean, if I sort of think of the perfect person, that's kind of who comes to mind.
Yeah, I think regardless of your politics, right, you can look at that and say, hey, he's a very
Yes,
charismatic person.
that's
I
right.
think that actually one of the more recent examples we saw of that um, at the funeral for President Carter, him sitting
Right,
next
right.
to President Trump, and those two being able to have
That's
what
right.
appeared to be a very pleasant conversation, even though you know that ideologically they're in very different places.
That's exactly right. Yes,
Yep. Yeah.
that's
I
right.
love that. When you look at the actuarial profession, and you've obviously seen a lot of people throughout your career and the different places that you've worked, when you view the future of the profession, what do you see are the important characteristics or skills that successful leaders within the actuarial profession need to develop?
Right. So I mean, that's a great question, right? I think that I think the problems that sort of pose that were posed to the industry 15, 20 years ago or so are different from today and tomorrow, right? But definitely, I mean, that person has to have general qualities of a great leader, right? I mean, you have to be thinking about the future constantly. You have to have your pulse on the current as well. But I also think that, actuaries always or will be fine if you continue to ask the question why, right? Like why, and never settle for, things as they appear. It's like, oh yeah, I got the answer. Okay, I'm done. It's good. Everything checks out. I'm good. Like, no, I mean, there's a bunch of negatives and positives that are canceling out that, I mean, like the devil is in the details. I mean, I think that would always sort of keep us employed and, I mean, constantly thinking of why and, why this answer is not the correct one, right? I mean, even if it is the correct one, try to come up with 3 or 4 ways, that you can try to disprove this answer being right. And it's like, I mean, obviously, like the AI talk about the future and all that. I mean, that's always going to be there. I mean, I think that's always, I mean, AI is branded as AI today, but there were other forms of AI, 10 or 15 years ago that was supposed to take away all the jobs, and actuarial jobs would be, you push a button on the computer and it would do what actuaries do, and we're even more valuable now because again of the way we were our education. But I think constantly questioning, and one of the great one great actuary I worked with years ago, she would never settle with a number. It didn't matter if it reconciled or tied, and it was what we expected. It was like, all right, let's think of ways we can disprove this number. And I think that would always be a very powerful trait for us.
Well, I think for our listeners today, that what you've said probably won't come as a surprise, just given your background and some of the other things that you've talked about. I mean, if we had to boil down today's conversation, it's probably you could probably summarize it as be curious, right? That's clearly a value that you have, and you've emulated in the way you've conducted yourself throughout your career. And I wholeheartedly agree. It's such a good trait to learn, or skill to learn, is to be curious in all that you do. Not just settle for an answer, but really dig into the why on any of it. Why is it right? Why is it wrong? Whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I know our listeners will take a lot out of our conversation today. Ugo, I want to thank you for joining us. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, this has been great. Thanks for including me in this. This has been awesome. So people can obviously find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Ugo. If you type UGO actuary, I'm the only one. You'll see. You don't have to memorize my last name. And I'm also on FTI's website, and as one of the experts. So you can find me in my place of employment, FTI Consulting. You'll see my work email there. But this has been great. Thanks, Mike.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank my guest. I'm going to try this one more time. Ugo Okpewho.
Pretty good.
Hopefully it's better than 50%. 55. Making some progress.
You made progress, yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and ask that you please subscribe and like this podcast to help us share stories like Ugo's that can help benefit the actuarial community. The leadership development community of the CCA is open to any actuary. You can reach out to the CCA to join. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and on our website. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and thanks, Ugo, again for joining us.
Here.